Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeff Houghton for Tag Cyber. Today, I am joined by Steve Malone. Steve is with Egress, and he's the Vice President of Product Management. Steve, how are you?
I'm very well. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, so real quick up top, just give me a quick snapshot of Egress, and then let's get to know you after that.
Fantastic. Well, Egress are essentially a provider of email security products addressing human-activated risk, and I can dig into what that means in a few minutes for you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So tell me your story, your career. How'd you get into this?
So I joined Egress last year to head up product management, but I've been in the IT industry and the sort of cybersecurity industry for far too long now. So I'm going to say 20 plus years as probably a nice way of saying it, which is a very, very scary thought. That seems like a long time. Um, but it's been a fantastic journey, and like I say, I started about 20 odd years ago, and I began my journey in actually the world of AS400, so green screens and command lines. And I moved from there into looking after Windows Server environments, which seemed just a lot more user friendly and a lot more simple in the organizations that I was working for. And as I moved throughout my early career, I remember working for a company, and the cool team were the cyber security folks, or information security, as we used to call it back then. And I decided that I wanted to join that info security team. And that was really the start of my journey into info security, or what we now call cyber security. And throughout the years, I've done security internally for those companies. I moved out into the channel, into the world of reseller, and then moved into the land of vendors, and finally arriving here at Egress. So that journey really has sort of given me the ability to learn about security, to be heavily involved in security and IT, both in organizations and for organizations, and really to become part of the world of product management as well in those organizations. And I think for me, as I think back, the key themes throughout that journey are making things better for people within organizations. That's really what security means to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so you got into it to be part of the cool team, and then and then I mean, obviously it's changed tremendously in those 20 years, but it seems like that would be actually quite helpful to have been in it for so long to see how it adapts and how it builds on itself, right?
Absolutely, definitely, and I think it's as I look back, it's really interesting to see, to see sort of how security trends have changed over time. From companies being so heavily focused on their perimeter, multiple layers of firewalling and multiple points of on-premise technology, through to that perimeter disappearing and people becoming more remote, organizations moving to the cloud. So there have been huge changes in the world of IT and how companies do IT, and therefore how companies protect themselves over the years. But I think what's interesting is that there are a lot of security issues that are, I guess, still depressingly familiar and depressingly consistent. One of the things that always amazes me is that the first piece of ransomware showed up in the wild in 1989, and we're now in 2022, and one of the most pressing and high risk threats to any organization is ransomware. And this is something that showed up in 1989. So it's a very interesting thing that a lot of these threats are continuing, but globally we haven't managed to fix those issues yet.
Yeah, and so it seems like there's always going to be bad actors right there, and so it seems like
Yeah.
the what Egress says is let's empower the good actors, and you talk about the human layer of security. What does that mean? What does Egress do to combat all that?
That's a great question. So egress, I'll give you our journey as well as I've talked
Hmm.
about mine. I'll tell you about egress. So egress as a company have been around for about 14 years, and they've always been focused, or I should say, we have always been focused on reducing risk for our customers. And initially, Egress were very focused on outbound email security and specifically around the concept of highly secure encryption technology and highly secure encryption technology for industries where that really counts. So the early focus was around, government accounts, healthcare, public sector, but industries where that level of protection was really, really key. But then over the years, obviously, as we just talked about, the threat landscape evolved, but email really became or continued to be, I suppose, the most important and business critical application for pretty much every organization worldwide. And therefore, really at the epicenter of the threat landscape. So especially over the last 10 years, we've seen email increase in its use in most of the big cyber attacks. So over the years, Egress began to put more focus on that email ecosystem. So extending the protection from just encryption to DLP. So essentially being able to detect things like misdirected communications outbound. Our old friend Outlook's autocomplete function is a great way to accidentally exfiltrate data. Or even the scenario where you have a malicious insider who is trying to exfiltrate data via email. So Egress put a lot of focus onto those use cases. And then the game changer in the world of IT over the last few years has been driven by Microsoft. So 365 or Microsoft 365 really has changed the way that organizations think about IT and how organizations think about security or providing security to their users. And so for us, for Egress, we think about kind of 360 degrees of security with a very email focus. We're focused on those outbound human activated risks, but also inbound is critical as well. Phishing, ransomware, business email compromise, these all remain the most important things really that organizations need to worry about when they're thinking about security. So when we look at our portfolio now, and when we talk about human layer security, what we mean is that we're using our product to address that human activated risk in our customers. And the way that we articulate that, so our mission is essentially that as organizations are moving to Microsoft 365, we aim to help our customers to reduce that human activated risk. But critically, we do that without adding unnecessary cost and complexity. So that's really the egress journey and what we do now.
Yeah, yeah. I'm fascinated by the combination of machine learning and saying, let's empower, let's almost let's deputize users to know how to look for it with these little reminders. So there's egress, defend, prevent, protect, and what do those different aspects do?
Absolutely. And, I think it's been proven over, well, especially in the 20 years that I've been in the industry, 20 years plus, it's been proven that no technology is ever going to be 100% effective against stopping a cyber threat. And if you look back, throughout the years, the industry, the cyber security industry moved from messaging that talked about 100% protection to messages that talked about, well, a breach is inevitable, so it's all about the post-breach cleanup, to a position where I think we're at now, which essentially is almost a mixture of those things, which is saying that it's impossible to mitigate all threats effectively from a technical point of view. So it's really important to make use of smart systems and things like machine learning to help to detect those threats. But really, the common theme in all of these attacks is the human. It's the person. It's the person accidentally, downloading and installing ransomware. It's the person who clicks on a link in an email, or it's the person who, responds to a message from their supposed CEO saying, "I need you to transfer $1 million to my bank account urgently." The key theme there is the person. So, we believe that if we can empower people to become part of the security solution, then that means that they're not part of the security problem. And I know that that's quite an aspirational goal, and it's something that a lot of organizations talk about. And it's a difficult thing to do. If you think about the people in an organization, they're always focused on doing their day job, the reason that they're there. And probably for most people in the organization, the reason that they're in that role is not to do cybersecurity for their organization. So the challenge, and this is what we spend a lot of time thinking about, the challenge is, how do we turn those people into cyber advocates, or even just making them more aware? And the way that I like to think about this is that, we're not guaranteeing that those people will never cause an incident or will never do something stupid, but it's about risk reduction. So we believe that email is still a mission critical system, and people spend a lot of time in email, in Outlook, in the email client. So anytime that you try to take somebody out of that email client, whether that's to watch a training video or to do something else, that's taking their focus away from what they should be doing. So the way that we approach this is we try to use teachable moments in real time. So, showing things like banners within the messages to highlight risk, or pop-ups that essentially prompt the user to say, "Hey, are you sure you should be sending this information to this person? Did you mean to send it to that person?" So by using that concept of teachable moments, and by making these teachable moments in real time and within the application that they're using, we feel that doesn't distract the user, but it also just helps to give them that additional level of awareness. So it's about risk.
To that point, one of the things I like about it, I think is interesting, is there are those real-time reminders. Did you mean to do this? That sort of thing. But what it does is it gets the person thinking about it too, doesn't it? So that even when they're not in that moment, they're more aware, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, if you look at things like, phishing awareness and training and testing, that's one of the goals, or one of the aspirational goals for that technology market, was to do that. It was to make people aware of cybersecurity. And I think, one of the challenges that companies in that space often have is the fact that, they're taking the user out of that workflow. So I think for us, the most critical piece was making sure that awareness was being delivered as part of their work rather than additional to what they were doing.
And I've seen another egress leader in another interview say, any security software that touches users will not be used unless it's easy, right? And I think that's true for all of us. So it seems like you really want it to be effective and just like simple, right? Simple for the user.
Absolutely, yeah. And in all of my time in cybersecurity, in my head, I've always had this kind of sliding scale when I've been thinking about security. At one end you have usability, and at the other end of the scale you have security. And the further you move towards security, the further away you move from usability. The most usable system is one that has no passwords that everybody can access, and that's fantastic. But that's not very secure. And I always remember, this is showing my age now, but I always remember back in the very old days, reading part of, I think it was Microsoft's C2 security standard. And if you wanted to be the most compliant that you could possibly be on your Windows server, you had to unplug the network cable. So super secure, but obviously not very usable. And I always remember that as, a great example of that security versus usability. So for me, it's about, finding that balance, and, being in product management is about that. It's being able to find that balance between usability and security. And the teachable moments concept is a great example of that.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned you've been doing this in the industry for 20 years, and you've seen how it changes. You with egress, you're focused on a human layer of security. Where do you see what are the trends in cyber? Where are we going now? You've had this kind of long view at it. What do you see looking ahead?
Love that question. It's one of my favorite questions. And I could talk on this for hours, but in the interests of time for you, I'll give you four trends that I think we'll continue to see. So the first one is I don't want to call this a cop out, but I'll let you make your own mind up there. The first one is that the trends that we've been seeing will continue. So email is going to remain a primary attack vector. I mentioned earlier that ransomware has been around since 1989. Email is a very old technology and it's ubiquitous. So it's the easiest way for somebody anywhere in the world to launch an attack against an organization. So those trends, those depressing trends, will continue. And while they are continuing to work, attackers don't need to evolve them. I mean, clearly, they evolve attacks and they evolve attack methodologies, but the core email-based attacks will absolutely continue. So, we need to do whatever we can to mitigate and to help solve those problems. But I think what is interesting is that attacks will start to become more multi-channel. And if you think about the way that the world has changed over the last couple of years, during the pandemic and then post-pandemic, the world has moved to remote working in a way that I don't think anyone could ever have predicted. And if you think about that combined with a much younger workforce entering, many organizations, if you think back sort of 5 or 6 years, people used to talk about the death of email as companies like Slack brought out their messaging systems. And at the time, it just seemed so distant and so unlikely. But if you think about that younger workforce who are used to making use of things like WhatsApp and more messaging-based technology on their phones, if you think about the fact that many of us are still and will continue to work remotely for the foreseeable future, if not permanently, then that means that other forms of internal communication will become more important. So things like Slack, things like Teams, for example. And that will mean that email will start to share communication mindspace or mindshare within organizations. So I think multi-channel attacks will be something that we'll likely see growing in future. Number two, I think, is that when I think about the type of thing that an attacker wants to get, when you look back a couple of years and you think about business email compromise, the initial goal for attackers there was to exfiltrate money from organizations. And that moved very quickly to data. And I think we're in a situation now where credentials really are the thing that every attacker wants to get access to. So credential theft and account takeover will continue to become a cybersecurity trend, in the future. And then if you couple that with increasing risk in the supply chain, that really is an area where I think everybody globally needs to focus and put some thought into. And then I guess more conceptually, zero trust as a concept is something that has been talked about and has made headlines in the last year or so. And again, I think, as I now look back throughout, messages and types of technology over the years, zero trust is one of those things that I think a lot of vendors will start talking about. And what's interesting to me is that zero trust is not a product. So as I look out in the cybersecurity space, I see a lot of companies talking about zero trust as if it's something that you can purchase and install and all of your zero trust woes disappear, which is just not the case. So, for me, zero trust is a strategy, and it's very important, and it's something that really is an evolution of the way that we used to think about firewalls, which was block everything by default and then only open up what you need. For me, zero trust is sort of almost an extension of that early or basic concept, which is basically saying trust nothing unless you specifically choose to trust it. And I think the most important thing for organizations to think about with zero trust is to think about it as a strategy and to map out how are you going to achieve that, not just with technology, but with people and processes. And then think about how products or other technologies can help you to achieve that. And then finally, I think something that is really interesting to continue watching is the concept of cyber insurance. Now, again, this is something that I've been quite interested in for a number of years. And I remember first reading about the topic of cyber insurance a number of years ago. And it just, to me, it just didn't seem to work. In my head, I couldn't marry up the stuffy world of insurance. I apologize to anyone listening, by the way, who may be in insurance. But insurance is a very slow moving industry, and it's based on known and defined regulations and boundaries. And then if you think about the world of cybersecurity, I mean that's a world that changes not hourly, but every minute, every second of every day. Attack types change, and the way that organizations are being attacked can change, and the threat landscape is changing. So for me, I could never marry up that concept of insurance with the cybersecurity threat landscape. But I think in the last year or so, the concept of cyber insurance has become more flexible and has taken on board the fact that the threat landscape is very, very dynamic. So I think moving forward, we'll see an increase in people not even choosing to take cyber insurance, but as part of regulatory compliance, having to take cyber insurance for their organization.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, and I think thanks for you obviously took some time preparing that, and you think about it all the time, I'm sure, and it carries a lot of weight coming from you having been in the industry for so long, and it seems like you all do such a great job of saying, here's something that's coming up that we have to deal with. Let's develop a strategy. We'll use it, and we create a strategy based off of it. Steve, thanks so much for taking the time with us today. This is very informative on egress and many more. So thanks for being with us.
You're welcome, Jeff. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So on behalf of all of us at Tag Cyber, we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.